Saipan, July 1944. The island smolders under the Pacific sun, its once green ridges now blackened by shell fire and silence. The wind carries the faint smell of burned oil, and beneath it, the iron tang of death. Among the ruins of a field hospital, Imperial Army nurse Chio Tanaka kneels beside a stretcher, her white gloves stained brown with dust and blood. She has stopped counting the dead. For weeks, she and the other Japanese nurses have moved like ghosts through the shattered coral hills, tending to soldiers who refuse to be saved. They have all been taught that surrender is worse than death, that capture means dishonor not just for oneself, but for the emperor. Better to die cleanly, her commander had said, pressing a glass vial of poison into her hand. If they find us, we drink. Now, as the American voices echo nearer through the jungle, that moment has come. The hospital tents are gone, shredded by mortar fire. The stretchers lie empty. The wounded who could still walk have crawled into caves or thrown themselves from cliffs. Chio sits quietly beside her last patient, a boy no older than 16, his bandaged leg trembling as he whispers the emperor's name. She lifts the vial, her hand steady, but the boy reaches up weakly and stops her. "Nurse, I want to live," he murmurs. The words strike her harder than any explosion. For a moment, she cannot breathe. Outside, the sound of boots crunching gravel draws closer. Someone shouts in a language she does not know. The boy hides his face. Chio stands, shoulders straight, waiting for the enemy to appear. They come not as monsters, but as men. Young faces under helmets, eyes wary, yet curious. One gestures toward her blood-stained armband. Another lowers his weapon and says something softly. Words she cannot understand, but whose tone is unmistakably gentle. Then something even more bewildering happens. One of them holds out a canteen. Chio hesitates. Every instinct screams trap. But the thirst is unbearable. Slowly, she takes it. The water is warm, metallic, yet clean. When she looks up, the soldier is smiling, not with triumph, but relief. That is the moment the world begins to unravel. She is led down the hill with the other captured nurses, perhaps a dozen survivors. The path winds through fields where palm trees lie flattened like broken spears. American corpsmen pass carrying stretchers, whispering orders, stopping to help even the wounded Japanese. Chio stares in disbelief as an American medic kneels beside a fallen Japanese lieutenant, cutting open a bandage and injecting something clear into his arm. "Penicillin," one of the nurses whispers, remembering the rumors. "A medicine that heals infection." It feels impossible. They heal even their enemies? At the prisoner collection point, a tent flaps gently in the afternoon wind. An American woman stands there. A nurse, her hair pinned neatly under a cap, her eyes soft but alert. She looks at the Japanese women with something that neither pity nor pride can describe. She simply says, "You're safe now. You're safe." The word means nothing. In the code of Bushido, safety is for cowards. Yet as the sun dips toward the sea, Chio feels the first faint tremor of confusion. That night, under armed guard, the POW nurses are given food, real food. Not dried rice or moldy biscuits, but something called sea rations. Tins of meat, crackers, and chocolate. The sweetness of the chocolate almost hurts her tongue. Nearby, American soldiers share candy with Japanese children who have wandered from the ruins. The children laugh, clutching the bars like treasures. One of the nurses whispers a prayer, uncertain if it is for forgiveness or understanding. Later, they are handed small parcels called comfort kits. Chio opens hers and gasps. Inside are soap, a toothbrush, a comb, and something unthinkable. Silk underwear. For a long time, she can only stare. Silk, the same fabric that once lined her kimono back home, a luxury reserved for women of status. Now it lies in her lap, given freely by the enemy. Another nurse breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably. "Why?" she whispers. "Why do they do this?" No one answers. As night settles, the camp hums softly with distant radio music. The sea murmurs against the reef. Chio lies awake, the silk folded neatly beneath her head, as if afraid to touch it again. She thinks of the poison vial still hidden in her medical satchel, and of her commander somewhere in the caves, perhaps still waiting for her to bring death to him. But she cannot move. The scent of soap lingers on her hands. For the first time in years, they are clean. She remembers the boy who said, "I want to live." And suddenly, she is terrified. Not of dying, but of what living might mean now. The world that was once made of black and white, loyalty and shame, honor and surrender, has begun to blur. The Americans' laughter drifts across the camp, mingling with the whisper of waves and the rustle of palm leaves. Somewhere, a woman hums a tune, gentle, almost like a lullaby. Chio closes her eyes, clutching the edge of her blanket. She is no longer sure which side of the war she stands on, only that she has crossed an invisible border. From obedience into doubt. The night air feels warm, almost merciful. And though she does not yet understand it, something within her has begun to heal. But mercy, like silk, is fragile in a soldier's world. By morning, the sun hangs high over the Saipan coastline, casting long shadows across the camp. The sea glimmers beyond the barbed wire, its beauty cruel in contrast to the lives unraveling beneath its gaze. The prisoners, women, soldiers, children, move cautiously, as if afraid each kindness might still be a trap. Chio rises early. Her uniform has been replaced with clean fatigues, simple and loose-fitting, with POW stitched in faded English across the back. Her hair is damp from the makeshift shower, hot water like a dream, and she cannot stop touching her clean skin. She no longer smells like death, but inside her satchel, tucked under a folded towel, the poison vial remains, cool, smooth, faithful. She has not told the Americans she is a trained nurse. Not yet. She fears what might be asked of her, fears being pulled into their strange world of triage and cooperation. So she stays silent, observing. Then, just before midday, her silence is broken. A young boy, one of the camp's Japanese-speaking interpreters, approaches. He bows, eyes down. "There is someone asking for you," he says. "A commander. Wounded." He says your name. Chio's breath catches. She follows the boy to a small medical tent guarded by 2 U.S. Marines. Inside lies Lieutenant Okabe, her former field commander, the one who handed her the vial and promised her an honorable end. He is thinner now, with blood seeping slowly through gauze at his hip. His once fierce eyes look sunken, but they still burn with the same fire. "You live," he rasps. She bows deeply, instinctively. "Yes, Commander." He gestures for the guards to leave, and they do. Though one lingers near the flap, arms crossed, watching. Chio kneels beside the cot, and Okabe lowers his voice. "I need it," he says. She knows what he means. "No," she whispers. His hand shoots out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "You promised me. Do not disgrace me in front of these devils. I will not rot under their mercy." She looks at him, really looks, and sees what she once feared in herself. A man no longer capable of changing. His world, his code, his emperor, All are fading, and he clings to death like a raft in a drowning storm. I can't, she replies. His voice sharpens, venom behind each syllable. You swore upon the flag. You took the oath. Are you now one of them? Chio says nothing. You shame us all, he hisses. Your father, your ancestors, your country. She feels her throat tighten. Tears press behind her eyes, but she will not give him that power. Instead, she stands. They saved your life, she says quietly. You should know that. She leaves before he can answer. Outside, the air feels thicker than before. She finds herself walking past the tents, beyond the kitchen line where American cooks hum while stirring steel pots. She walks to the women's barracks, where the other POW nurses sit quietly sewing scraps into crude shirts and bags, a kind of assigned labor that no one complains about. It is honest work, clean work. One of the nurses looks up. Was it him? Chio nods. The nurse lowers her eyes. He asked me too. No one says anything more. That evening, the Americans hold something strange. A movie night. A large white bed sheet is stretched across two poles, and a real projector begins to whir. Dozens of prisoners gather, women and children first, seated under guard in the twilight. Chio does not understand the English words, but she sees the flickering images. American nurses dancing, smiling, caring for wounded men. She sees black soldiers and white soldiers laughing together. She sees children playing beside tanks. It is like a window into another universe. For a moment, she cannot breathe. Her hands clench. Is this real? Or propaganda? How could the same nation that bombed Tokyo now show smiling nurses giving candy to boys who look like her brothers? A child nearby offers her a biscuit. She takes it without thinking. Later that night, she returns to her bunk. The poison vial still rests in her satchel, untouched. She pulls it out, holds it up to the moonlight. The liquid inside glows faintly. She walks to the shoreline. The guards do not stop her. They only nod, arms resting lazily on their rifles. At the water's edge, she kneels in the cool sand. For a long while, she does nothing but listen. To the waves, to her heartbeat, to the thin memory of a home that might no longer exist. Then, slowly, she digs a hole with her fingers, places the vial inside, covers it. She does not pray, only breathes. A soft wind rises, carrying with it the salt of the Pacific and something else. Something unnameable. Behind her, a voice calls gently in broken Japanese. Tanaka-san, food, come. She turns. The American nurse from the comfort kit stands at the barrack steps, smiling faintly. No orders, no commands. Just a soft invitation. Chio walks back into the light. The light is not just the amber glow of the camp's flood lamps, nor the cold reflection of a warless sky. It is the strange warmth of being seen. Not as enemy, not as servant, but simply as woman, person, human. Inside the mess tent, the air is heavy with steam and unfamiliar spices. A long line of Japanese women file forward, tin trays in hand, some still too wary to speak. At the far end, American cooks stand behind the counter, ladling stew with a sort of cheerful boredom that feels surreal. Chio steps forward, tray outstretched. The man behind the ladle glances at her, then grins. "Mashed potatoes, miss," he says in slow, exaggerated English. She does not understand the words, but she understands the tone. Not mockery, but welcome. The food is warm, real. The stew is thick with vegetables. The potatoes are buttery and soft. A soft square of something sweet, cake, perhaps, sits at the corner of her tray. She stares at it for a moment, unsure whether to eat it last or save it entirely. Around her, other POW nurses eat slowly, cautiously, as though still waiting for the old world to reassert itself and snatch it all away. But it doesn't. The American nurse from before, her name, Chio has learned, is Grace, sits across the table. She's young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with pale skin and a calm face that rarely blinks. Her Japanese is broken, but soft, like someone learning not for strategy, but for kindness. "You eat good?" Grace says, tapping her own plate. Chio nods. "Yes, very." Her voice cracks from disuse. Grace smiles. "Tomorrow I take you medical." Chio blinks. "I help?" Grace touches her chest. "You, nurse. I, nurse. Together. Understand?" For a moment, Chio feels something old and familiar stir in her chest. Duty, perhaps. Not to flag or emperor, but to healing. To people. She lowers her head, high. The next morning, she is issued a white armband with a red cross, not the Imperial symbol she once wore, but the universal emblem of care. The American infirmary tent smells of disinfectant and canvas. Rows of beds stretched neatly, each with a clipboard, a pitcher of water, and patients from both sides, Japanese and American, side by side. It is a battlefield without hatred. Grace walks her through the basics. No formal orders, just gestures and quiet demonstrations. How to wrap a wound, how to mark down vitals on unfamiliar English charts, how to use strange new tools. Then comes the moment that nearly breaks her. On one of the cots lies Private Nishida, a soldier from her regiment. His eyes flutter open, and recognition flashes across his face. "Tanaka-san?" Chio bows slightly. "Hi." He tries to rise. "You live." "Lie still," she says softly, pressing his shoulder. "You're safe." He looks past her, at the American nurses, at the tent walls, at the sunlight filtering in. Is this the afterlife? She almost laughs, but she does not. She wets a cloth and lays it across his brow. No, just a place where no one wants you to die today. And somehow, that feels like a kind of heaven. Over the next days, she learns to move between languages, not with words, but with gestures, nods, warmth. She cleans wounds, applies medicine, and one afternoon, helps deliver a baby born to a terrified Okinawan woman who had survived the cave fire bombings. Grace holds one hand. Chio holds the other. When the infant finally cries out, both women weep. But not all moments are soft. Some patients curse her in Japanese. Others, American Marines missing limbs, eye her warily, unsure if the woman dressing their wounds once aided those who fired upon them. One man, tall with a beard and a missing arm, mutters, "Jap witch," when she passes. Grace hears and says nothing. But later, when no one is watching, Grace takes Chio's hand and squeezes it gently. That night, Chio sits at the shoreline again, the tide brushing her toes. She no longer carries the poison vial. She carries gauze, aspirin, and a small tin of American lip balm given to her for dry air. She opens it, smells the faint peppermint. What kind of enemy gives their prisoners peppermint? She looks up at the stars. Not the same ones she memorized in school books, charting constellations of the divine emperor. These feel older, quieter, and strangely equal. Behind her, voices drift on the breeze. American, Japanese, Tagalog, Chamorro. The language of survivors, not soldiers. The war is not over. She knows this. Battles rage on other islands. Bombers fly overhead at night. And yet, here, in this strange corner of the war, she has begun to taste a life that is not poisoned by fear. Silk underwear, chocolate rations, clean sheets, and hands, American and Japanese, working together to keep another heart beating. She does not yet know who she is becoming, but she is certain of one thing. She will not go back. Days melt into weeks. The monsoon rains come, soft and relentless, washing away the ash from the hills. The camp's barbed wire gleams wet and harmless beneath the gray sky. Inside, the rhythm of survival shifts, no longer about hunger or fear, but about the strange ache of waiting. Chio has grown quieter. Her English improves through listening, not speaking. She observes how the Americans laugh easily, how they mourn quickly but without ceremony. Life to them seems both sacred and casual, as if its value lies not in duty but in persistence. One afternoon, she is assigned to clean the storage tent behind the infirmary, a space filled with crates labeled Medical Aid, U.S. Army. As she works, she finds a box half buried under tarps, its lid broken. Inside are folded papers and envelopes, hundreds of them, smeared with water and time. Letters, most are written in English, undelivered, addressed to homes in Ohio, Kansas, and places she cannot imagine. Many end the same way. Tell Ma I'm okay. Don't worry. She cannot read them, but the shape of the handwriting, the careful loops, the little stains of sweat and fingerprints, they speak a language she understands. Love, fear, hope. Then she finds one written in Japanese. The paper is thin, creased, bearing the Imperial seal. The ink has run, but a few words remain legible. Mas to my daughter, Tanaka Chio. If you still live. Her hands tremble. She unfolds it fully. The letter is from her father. The date, April 1944, months before the invasion. My daughter, you must remember that the world changes even when our hearts resist it. If you survive, do not let our emperor's sorrow consume you. Serve life, not death. Your mother prays each morning that you will see flowers again. The bottom half is torn away. She clutches it as if it were a living thing. For hours she cannot move. The sound of rain on canvas becomes distant, like the hum of memory. Her father's words pierce through the fog of her indoctrination. Serve life, not death. That night, she sits with Grace in the dim light of a hurricane lamp. The American nurse is mending a torn sleeve, humming a tune that drifts like smoke. Chio lays the letter on the table. Father, she whispers, tapping the page. He writes. Grace looks at the damaged paper and nods softly. Good man, she says. Chio hesitates. He say, live, not die. Grace's eyes meet hers. Then he's wiser than most generals. They sit in silence for a long while. The rain thunders harder outside, but inside the tent there is peace. Fragile, human, real. The next day, she takes her turn tending the wounded. Among them is Lieutenant Okabe again. Weaker now, his skin pale, eyes hollow. He refuses food, speaking only in whispers to an imaginary command. When she changes his bandage, he stirs. You, still here? He mutters. Yes, she says quietly, still. He looks at her, and for a fleeting instant, the old fire fades. They will make you forget who you are, he says. She shakes her head. No, I remember. I am nurse. He laughs bitterly. A nurse for the enemy. She finishes her work without answering. Then she places the damp cloth on his forehead. You are wrong, she says finally. I am a nurse for the living. That night, she dreams of her home in Yokohama, of cherry blossoms falling into river water, of her mother hanging silk sheets to dry. But when she reaches to touch them, the fabric turns into bandages, stained and floating away. The next morning, she writes her first letter to no one. There is a nurse named Grace who hums when she works. There is a man with one arm who smiles now when I bring him soup. There is a child who no longer cries at night. Perhaps this is what victory should feel like. She folds it carefully, though she knows it will never be sent. Later, a shipment arrives at the camp. Supplies and mail for the Americans. Grace receives a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside is a pair of silk stockings and a note signed Mother. She laughs softly, embarrassed, then offers one pair to Chio. "For you," Grace says. Chio touches the silk, its texture impossibly soft. The same kind given in the comfort kit weeks ago. But this time, it carries a different weight. It no longer feels like irony or humiliation. It feels like connection. "Why?" Chio asks. "You give me?" Grace smiles faintly. "Because my mother would." That night, the war feels far away. The thunder of artillery has been replaced by distant surf. The silk lies folded beside her cot, not a symbol of surrender, but of gentleness surviving where it should not. She looks again at her father's letter, its torn edge fluttering in the candlelight. Serve life, not death. For the first time, she believes he was right. The next morning, she steps outside before dawn. The camp is quiet, the air clean after rain. The horizon glows faintly gold. She breathes deeply and realizes she is no longer waiting to die. She is waiting to begin. The sky over Saipan softens with early light, brushing the camp in pale gold. Palm fronds sway with a gentleness that betrays the island's past violence. As the guards shift and stretch, as if waking from a collective dream, Chio steps quietly out of the women's barracks and walks toward the infirmary. Not as a prisoner now, but as someone with a purpose. Inside, the tent is already alive with murmurs and movement. Chio rolls up her sleeves beside Grace, who hands her a clean towel without a word. There is no ceremony, no permission sought, only the rhythm of routine, of tending, mending, healing. Their first patient is an American Marine with a broken jaw wired shut. He cannot speak. He winces as Chio wipes his brow, his eyes sharp with pain. But he does not pull away. She points to her own mouth, then gently gestures the act of drinking. The Marine nods. She lifts a straw to his lips. He sips, swallows, and gives her the smallest, most surprising thing. A wink. Chio blinks. Not a sneer, not a threat, just acknowledgement. The next patient is a young Chamorro boy, no more than 10, who had wandered into the camp weeks ago barefoot, with a deep gash in his thigh. He had refused treatment from the American nurses, hiding under a cot like a wild cat. But when Chio approached, he stopped shaking. Now, he waits every morning for her to change his bandage. She kneels beside him, pulling the gauze aside with practiced care. The wound is healing well. The angry red softened to pink. She hums as she works, a lullaby her mother once sang. The boy doesn't understand the words, but he closes his eyes and hums along. Grace watches from across the tent, arms folded, smiling. "You have magic hands," she says softly. Chio doesn't respond. Not because she doesn't understand, but because the words settle too deeply to speak over. After the morning rounds, Grace places a small English book in Chio's hands. The cover is blue, the pages yellowed. It's a beginner's reader, filled with simple phrases. "Learn?" Grace says, tapping the title. Chio nods slowly. "Yes, learn." In the evenings, after supper, she sits under the makeshift lantern light and traces the letters aloud. Apple, bread, nurse, heal. Words once foreign now begin to feel like seeds planted in fresh soil. She begins to teach in return, not with books, but with gestures. She shows Grace how to tie a traditional bandage knot used in Japanese field hospitals. She teaches her the kanji for light, guang, and pain, tong. They build a language not of sentences, but of service. One afternoon, a new group of prisoners arrives from a nearby island. Mostly wounded soldiers and a few civilian women. Among them is Nakamura Misako, an older nurse with sharp features and eyes that do not flinch. When she sees Chio wearing the Red Cross armband, speaking halting English, laughing softly with grace, her face hardens. "Traitor," she hisses as they pass. The word slices through the air like a blade. Chio stands frozen. Misako turns her back and walks away. That night, Chio does not sleep. She lies on her cot staring at the canvas ceiling, feeling once again the weight of invisible judgment. Not from her captors, but from her own people. Is she a traitor? Has kindness made her forget who she is? She remembers the look on Lieutenant Okabe's face. Proud, withering, terrified. And she remembers the Chamorro boy smiling through pain, and the Marine with the broken jaw lifting his hand to wave. No, she's not traitor, she is transforming. The next day, she finds Misako seated alone near the supply shed, folding linens with stiff precision. Chio kneels beside her and begins folding silently. Minutes pass. Then, Chio says gently, "My father sent letter," he said. "Serve life, not death." Misako does not respond. Chio adds, "I am still Japanese, but I am also nurse, always nurse." Still no reply. But Misako does not move away. They fold another towel and another. Sometimes, silence is the beginning of understanding. That afternoon, Grace places a photograph on Chio's cot. A black and white image of her and Chio taken by an army photographer, both in their nurses' uniforms, standing outside the infirmary, smiling without force. "I send to my mother," Grace says. "You, my sister now." Chio looks at the photo, her eyes moistening. "Sister," she repeats. She tucks the photo into her satchel beside her father's letter. Not hidden away, but resting where it belongs, beside the symbols of her rebirth. Later that week, during a particularly hot morning, a plane flies low overhead, a B-29, massive and gleaming, its shadow passing like a moving eclipse over the camp. Everyone looks up. One of the guards mutters, "Tokyo next." Chio flinches. She says nothing, but she feels it. The war is still alive, roaring in the sky above, burning in cities far away. She does not know what awaits Japan, or what waits for her after this camp. But here, on this strange island wrapped in barbed wire and mercy, she has begun to build something impossible. A life where hands once trained to obey can now choose to heal. But peace is not a steady thing. It flickers like a lantern flame, swayed by every gust of wind from a world still burning. It is early August when the tension returns. First, it comes in murmurs. Whispered conversations between guards, telegrams delivered with furrowed brows, radio static that gives way to words no one in the camp understands, except for the Americans. Then comes the night when the sky glows. The sea beyond Saipan reflects something unnatural. Not moonlight, not fire. Something in between. Grace stands outside the barracks with her arms folded, her face caught between awe and dread. Chio approaches her quietly. "What is it?" Grace doesn't answer. Her eyes remain fixed on the east. "Big bomb," she says finally. "Very big." The word bomb Chio understands. But Grace's voice is not proud. It is hollow. Later, in the infirmary, the radio broadcasts something in fast English. The word Hiroshima is repeated, again and again. Chio stiffens. Her hands tremble slightly as she adjusts a bandage. Hiroshima, a city, a place. Her cousin lived there, her childhood classmate. 1,000 memories carved in wooden houses, paper lanterns, riverside paths. "What happened?" she asks Grace. Grace doesn't answer at first. Then, barely audible, "It's gone." The silence that follows is not empty. It is unbearable. Over the next few days, the camp changes. The guards speak less. The supply trucks stop coming. Everyone seems to wait for something, though no one knows what. Then, as if the island itself has been holding its breath. The second name arrives over the radio. Nagasaki. Chio is seated in the medical tent when she hears it. She drops the gauze in her hands. Her knees weaken. Grace rushes over, steadying her, but Chio pushes her away and stumbles out into the sun. She does not cry, not because she is strong, but because the part of her that once wept has gone still. She walks to the wire fence at the edge of the camp, where the surf rolls endlessly in. She grips the rusted strands, looks out at the water, and whispers the only word that makes sense. Why? Behind her, footsteps crunch. Misako stands there, arms folded. "You see now," she says. "They smile. They feed us. But in the end, they destroy our home." Chio turns, her voice low. "You think I don't know?" Misako's eyes flash. "You pretend. You bow to them. Sew for them. Heal them." "I heal everyone," Chio replies. "Even those who kill your family." Chio cannot answer, because she does not know who is dead or who remains. Only that something inside her, something that once believed in lines drawn neatly between friend and enemy, has begun to collapse. That night, she sits beside Grace under the same lantern where they first studied words together. "You know?" Chio asks. "My cousin, Hiroshima." Grace's hands stop moving. She nods. "I'm sorry." "They all gone?" Grace hesitates, then answers truthfully, "I don't know." They sit in silence for a long time. Chio finally speaks. "If Japan..." "No surrender, you drop again?" Grace blinks. Her jaw clenches. "I'm just a nurse," she says. Chio nods slowly. "Me too." The next morning, rumors break like storm surf. The Emperor has spoken. Japan will surrender. No one believes it at first. But then it is confirmed. The war is over. The Americans fire no celebratory shots. No music plays. The camp becomes a strange echo chamber, filled not with cheers, but with quiet. Chio sees young American soldiers sitting in stunned silence, staring at the horizon as if uncertain what peace even looks like. Others write letters home. One carves a date into the wooden wall of a barracks. August 15th, 1945. Later that day, Lieutenant Okabe dies in his sleep. No poison, no final words. Just a slow fade, his breath leaving like smoke. Chio tends to his body with the same care she gave the Chamorro boy. She washes his face, folds his hands, and places the torn flag of Japan, found months ago in the rubble, across his chest. Misako stands in the doorway, watching, but says nothing. That night, the guards allow the Japanese prisoners to gather by the beach. A small fire is lit. No speeches are given. The flames crackle softly against the wind. Someone begins to sing, a lullaby, ancient and wavering. Others join. Chio does not sing. She watches the fire, thinking of Hiroshima, of her mother, of a letter torn at the edge. Grace appears beside her, silent, holding 2 cups of warm water. They drink together, and for a moment, nothing separates them. Not nation, not language, not loss. Only the sound of the waves and the smoke rising to the stars. The war was over, but the silence it left behind did not bring peace. It brought something more fragile, more difficult. Waiting. Weeks passed. The guards became gentler, less rigid. Uniforms loosened, rifles slung lower. The sharpness that once hung in every command faded into routine. Prisoners no longer flinched at footsteps. Children played more freely between the tents. But no one left. Repatriation, they said. Ships would come, eventually. Each day, Chio rose with the sun, tied back her hair, and walked to the infirmary. Patients now were fewer. Most were healing or gone. But there were still wounds that could not be seen. A man who hadn't spoken since the surrender. a woman who rocked herself to sleep each night, whispering a dead daughter's name. Grace remained steady through it all, her presence like a thread through the chaos, never pulled too tight, never frayed. She and Chio rarely spoke now, not because there was less to say, but because more of it was understood without words. Then, one morning, a supply jeep arrived at the camp. An unfamiliar officer stepped out, flanked by two clerks with clipboards and long faces. He read from a list: names, destinations, departures. When he reached Tanaka Chio, he looked up. "Saipan Medical? Nurse?" he asked. Chio nodded. "You're being transferred," he said. "Tokyo, Occupation Support, Civilian Liaison Program." The words meant little to her, but the meaning was clear. She would not be going home as a daughter. She would be returning as something else, an interpreter of mercy, perhaps, or a symbol of collaboration. Grace found her an hour later, sitting behind the infirmary tent, staring at her folded hands. "You leave?" Grace said. Not a question. "Yes," Grace nodded. Then reached into her satchel and pulled out a small square box. Brown paper, tied with string. No markings. No name. "This, for you," she said. Chio hesitated. "What is?" Grace smiled faintly. "Open on the ship." Chio held it gently. It was light, silent. The following day, she was issued fresh civilian clothes. A pale blouse, a gray skirt, soft canvas shoes. Her armband was taken, her prisoner number removed. She looked in the mirror of the infirmary tent, at the woman who stared back. She no longer looked like a soldier, nor a prisoner. Something in her face had softened, but her eyes had grown sharper, like water that has flowed over jagged rock and come out clearer. Before boarding the truck that would take her to the harbor, she walked once more to the shoreline. Misako stood there, arms folded, watching the waves. They hadn't spoken since the beach fire. Chio stood beside her. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Misako asked, "Do you think they will forgive us?" Chio didn't ask who they were. Mothers, daughters, spirits. "I don't know," she answered. "But I will not ask for it with death." Misako nodded slowly. Then, with a gesture almost too small to see, she touched Chio's arm. "Go. Show them what we are beyond war." The truck rumbled to life. Chio climbed in, the unmarked box held tightly in her lap. From the road above the camp, she looked back one last time. The tents, the beach, the curve of the coral reef. The place where she had buried a vial of poison and planted, unknowingly, a seed of rebirth. The ship to Tokyo was gray and loud, crowded with officers, translators, and wounded returning not to homes, but to ruins. On the second night at sea, she opened the box. Inside, folded carefully, was the pair of silk underwear from the first comfort kit. Washed, pressed, wrapped in tissue. Beneath it, a photograph. Grace and Chio, arms around each other, smiling. And a note. "Ostarm, not all silk is for seduction. Some is for survival. Some is for memory. You helped me believe in both. Grace." Chio held the silk in her hands, not as a gift, not as a luxury, but as a relic. She pressed it to her chest. And for the first time since the fires of Saipan, she cried, not for loss, not for shame, but for having lived through it. Later, standing at the railing, she looked out at the horizon. Somewhere ahead lay Tokyo. Scarred, broken, still breathing. She did not know what would be waiting. Perhaps rejection, perhaps silence. But she would go as she was now. A woman who had knelt before both death and mercy, and had chosen the hand that reached to heal. She would walk through the ashes of her homeland, not as a symbol of surrender, but as proof that the soul, when bathed in kindness, can begin again. The Tokyo harbor came into view beneath a blanket of morning mist. Not the majestic skyline Chio remembered from childhood, but a broken silhouette. Where once stood domes and spires, now only skeletons remained. Burned trusses, cracked docks. Smoke still drifted faintly from distant neighborhoods. The ship docked slowly, its anchor dropping with a groan like an exhausted body settling to rest. Japanese civilians stood at the pier, hollow-eyed, many barefoot. No cheering, no greetings. Just silence and wind. Chio stepped onto the dock with a canvas bag, the box from Grace tucked inside. Her Red Cross identification had been pinned to her blouse. She was not seen as a prisoner anymore. She was civilian support, a Japanese nurse assigned to the new U.S. occupation. But to the people watching her, she was something else. Collaborator, someone hissed as she passed. A woman in a tattered kimono pulled her child away sharply. A man muttered a curse and spat into the dirt. Chio kept her eyes forward. The truck that picked her up was American. The driver was young, southern accented, polite but distant. He handed her a file with assignments. She was to report to a makeshift clinic at the ruins of what used to be a middle school. The Americans had converted it into a field hospital. The streets of Tokyo told the story without words. Rows of scorched foundations, children picking through rubble for nails and bent tin. A horse collapsed in the road, ribs pushing through its skin. The only thing louder than the silence was the smell. Ash, oil, rot. But worst of all were the faces. No one met her eyes. Or if they did, it was with suspicion. She wasn't wearing mourning black. She didn't look starved. She didn't look defeated enough. When she arrived at the clinic, she stood in the yard for a long time before going in. Inside, the rooms echoed with coughing. The injured sat on mats. Some had bandages that hadn't been changed in days. The doctor on duty, a civilian man in his 50s, raised an eyebrow at her armband. "You're from Saipan?" he asked, without hiding the judgment in his tone. She nodded. "I served both sides," she said softly. "I am here to serve anyone who lives." He gave her a basin, pointed to a girl with burned legs, and said nothing more, and so she began. The next days passed in a blur of gauze and fever. The wounds here were different, not fresh and bloody like battlefield injuries, but slow, deep, desperate. Malnutrition, infection, skin diseases, pneumonia. There was no morphine, no penicillin, no chocolate for the children. She thought of the Chamorro boy, of the Marine with the broken jaw, of Grace humming in the infirmary as rain tapped on canvas. And she worked. Each night she returned to the small, roofless house assigned to her. Just walls, a cot, and a tin basin. She lit a candle and took out the silk underwear from Grace's box. She held them, not for comfort, but as a vow. In a world where so much was destroyed, small kindnesses became sacred. One evening, as she prepared to leave the clinic, a woman appeared at the gate. Thin, trembling, with her right eye swollen shut. In her arms, she carried a bundle. "I heard there was an American nurse who became one of us," the woman said. "I am no one," Chio replied. "But they say you know how to treat burns." Chio stepped forward and peeled back the bundle. Inside, a baby, no older than 4 months, blistered across the chest. The woman had used sake to clean the wounds. The child whimpered, too weak to cry. "I have nothing," the woman said. "Only prayers." Chio looked at the child, then at the woman. "Prayers are not enough," she said, "but hands are." She led them in. That night, Chio worked with nothing but boiled water and cloth. She sang softly as she cleaned each wound. She used old rice starch to make a cooling paste. The baby clung to her finger with fingers like reeds. The mother wept in the corner. And in that moment, Chio understood something that had taken her months to see fully. Mercy is not something one receives. It is something one chooses to give. Again and again, even when the world offers no reason to. When dawn broke, the baby still breathed. Chio stepped outside and looked toward the east. The sky was beginning to brighten, softening into the color of healing bruises. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. Whether her people would accept her, whether she would ever be anything but a reminder of war and shame. But she knew this. Her hands would stay open. She would keep them open. Because once, in a place called Saipan, someone had done the same for her. Autumn rolled across Tokyo quietly, like a respectful guest entering a grieving home. The ginkgo trees near the clinic began to turn gold, shedding their fan-shaped leaves into the gutters of ruined streets. Smoke no longer curled from buildings, but from kitchens. Rice boiling again. Fish grilled over tin stoves. Life, stubborn and slow, had returned. So had the wounded. But now, the wounds were not just of war. A teacher who collapsed from exhaustion while feeding 80 orphans with his own rations. A boy who stepped on an unexploded shell while playing in a collapsed temple. A woman who'd lost her voice after witnessing her neighbors hang themselves after the emperor's speech. These were not soldiers. These were survivors. And Chio had become their nurse. Each day, she boiled water before sunrise. Each day, she tied her hair back with a strip of cloth torn from her old prisoner uniform. And each day, she wrote one line in a small ledger before leaving her empty house. Healing is slower than war, but it leaves no graves. Then one morning, a letter arrived. American mail, sealed with a waxy stamp. Chio stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was careful, familiar. Dearest Chio, they've reassigned me to the Pacific Hospital ship Mercy Hope. We anchor near Yokosuka in November. I asked to come ashore. I asked for one name. Yours? I don't know if you'll receive this. I don't know if you'll want to see me. But if you do, I'll be waiting at the front gate of your clinic on the 1st of the month. Just before sundown. Bring nothing, only your hands. Grace. Chio read it 3 times, then folded it slowly and pressed it to her chest. The days passed like smoke through open windows. She told no one. Not Misako, not the doctor, not the old man who brought her sweet potatoes each week. But she knew what the date meant. Her hands grew restless. Her heart, too. When the 1st of November arrived, she worked all morning, pretending nothing was different. Her movements were steady, her words soft. But as the sun began its slow descent over the blackened rooftops, she walked out the clinic doors without speaking. The gate was where she had first received scorn. Where children had once thrown pebbles and shouted, "Traitor!" Now there was no one there, just the wind. And a figure standing in the distance, wearing a white cap. Grace, older, thinner, her uniform different. But her eyes, the same. And her smile, that soft, curved thing that had once broken down every wall Chio had built around her heart. They stood in silence. Then Grace stepped forward, held out her hand. Still soft, she joked. Still dangerous. Chio reached forward. Their hands met. Then Grace pulled something from her bag, a small envelope. Inside, a photograph. It showed a baby wrapped in gauze, smiling. A woman stood behind her, holding her proudly. On the back, in careful handwriting. To the nurse who gave us both breath again. Chio's lips trembled. They sent it through the Red Cross, Grace explained. Somehow, it found its way to my ship. I knew who it was meant for. Chio clutched the photo as if it were a living thing. They sat together on the clinic steps, the city glowing around them. Not with fire, but with lamps, lanterns, and cooking smoke. Grace pulled out 2 biscuits. "Stolen," she whispered. "But peace makes thieves of us all." They laughed quietly. The first laughter Chio had known in months. "I thought I'd be forgotten," Chio said at last. "You were remembered," Grace replied. "Every day." They sat until the stars appeared. And when Grace finally stood to leave, she reached into her satchel one last time and handed Chio a small, worn pin. The Red Cross emblem. "I kept it safe," she said. "But it belongs to you now. Because you taught me what it means." Chio didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because something deeper had taken root. A calmness, a strength forged not in ideology or war, but in shared breath, shared wounds, shared grace. That night, she placed the pin beside her father's letter and Grace's silk gift. Then, for the first time since returning to Tokyo, she wrote a letter. "A mother. I have seen the worst of the world, and I have seen the best. The world you prayed for, where mercy speaks louder than orders. It exists. I have held its hand." The winter wind swept through the alleys of Tokyo like a breath exhaled from the ruins themselves. Smoke curled upward from clay stoves, and old women sat beside fire pits, peeling sweet potatoes with cracked fingers. The city did not celebrate its survival. It endured it. At the clinic, the walls were patched with scrap wood. The ceiling still leaked. But within those rooms, life was not just returning. It was choosing to remain. Chio moved through each day with calm precision. She no longer marked the hours. Time, to her, was now measured in wounds that closed, fevers that broke, children who smiled, and in the quiet moments, when her hands were still, she would sometimes lift Grace's letter from its folded corner, run her fingers over the ink, and remember the voice that once said, "You, my sister now." That memory, more than any uniform or title, was the only thing she still wore. One morning, she was called to a makeshift refugee center near Ueno Park. The reports were of a woman in labor, weak, possibly infected. The clinic had no transport, so she walked through alleys of silence, past walls still charred black, past children playing with stones that had once been shrine foundations. She found the woman inside a broken tea house, younger than expected, skin pale. Labor had started too soon, and she was alone. Chio worked quickly, boiled water, wrapped her scarf around the girl's brow, held her hand, whispered encouragements between contractions, not as soldier, not as authority, but as something simpler. One woman to another. The baby came as the sun broke through the clouds. A girl, small and slick and loud, her cry louder than any siren. The mother wept silently. Chio wrapped the infant in her own coat, then placed the child in her mother's arms. When she stepped back into the street, she paused, looked up. The sky was blue, unscarred. For the first time in many months, she didn't see the sky as a place from which bombs fell, but as something sacred again. Something to be grateful for. Later that night, she lit a single candle in her empty home, sat at her desk, and wrote, "To Grace, today I delivered a child into this broken world." She cried like thunder. She cried like forgiveness. Sometimes, I still hear voices from the cave, from the mountain, from the command tent. They tell me I betrayed them, that I failed the way of the sword. But then I hear other voices, quieter, older, a baby's cry, a soldier's thank you, a woman's laughter in the rain. I choose to follow those voices now. If ever you return to this land, know that a part of you remains in every bandage I tie, every rice bowl I offer, every child I help bring into breath. I have not forgotten Saipan. I carry it in my hands. She folded the letter. She would not send it. She did not need to. Some messages were not meant for paper. They were written in acts. Months passed. The ginkgo trees bloomed again. Misako visited one day, carrying 2 bowls of miso soup. They ate on the steps of the clinic. No apologies were spoken. They weren't needed. In time, the American clinics closed. The uniforms disappeared. The foreign doctors returned home, but Chio remained, not because she was told to, not because she had nowhere else, because here, in this city of ash and silence, she had become the version of herself that could not have been born in any empire. She had become her father's prayer, her mother's hope, her enemy's sister. At the corner of her desk, she kept 3 items: her father's torn letter, Grace's silk-wrapped gift, a photograph of a smiling child wrapped in gauze. Every morning she lit incense beside them, not as ritual, but as memory. One flame to remember the past, one flame to forgive it, one flame to keep the light. And so, even as the world moved forward, rebuilt railways, reopened factories, forgot its ghosts, Chio stayed in that small clinic, offering the one thing war could never teach: a hand that heals without asking who you were before it touched you.